We want to welcome everyone to the Southern Region RAC tonight. Let's start with some introductions and procedures. Just something to point out right out of the gate so everyone's aware. In the room, we have speakers that pick up all the comments from the public.
You mean microphones?
Microphones, thank you, not speakers. But when you're listening online, you can hear all the conversations out in the chairs. So if you want to say something that everyone can hear, I guess that's fine. But it is distracting as you're having side conversations. So if I could just encourage everyone to keep those to a low hush, that'll make the online a lot better. With that said, I don't think we have any board members joining us tonight. Let's go ahead and introduce the RAC members. If you can say who you represent and where you're from, we'll start. If you can start over there with you, Craig.
Craig Glob from Iron County, representing agriculture.
Verlin King from Bicknell, representing agriculture.
Chuck Chamberlain from Cedar City, representing the Forest Service.
Dan Fletcher, VOM, Cedar City.
Gene Boardman from Hinckley, representing the public at large.
And then we have a couple members joining us online. Tammy, Austin, and Bart, if you guys could introduce yourselves in that order.
Tammy Pearson, Minersville. I'm the elected official representative from Beaver County.
Austin Atkinson from Cedar City, representing public at large.
Fort Batista, Kanab, Utah, non-consumptive rep.
And I'm Braden Richmond, representing Sportsman and also the chair of the Southern RAC. Just want to point out that Wade Heaton from the Wildlife Board did join us online, so I want to recognize him, thank him for being here in attendance. With that said, let's just jump right into the first action item, which is the approval of the agenda and the minutes. So if anyone wants to make a motion to approve those, or if you have any questions on those.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Okay, so motion by Dan and a second by Chuck. Let's go ahead and do a roll call on that where we have several people online. So Gene?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Austin?
Yes.
And Bart?
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay, we'll jump into the first informational item, the Wildlife Board meeting update. Just to comment on that, these meetings are very close together, the last Wildlife Board meeting and then this round of RACs. So as of today, I haven't got the official minutes. I talked to Kevin before the meeting and we discussed we could compare our notes and try to relay what happened at the meeting. But I think in order to play it safe, we'll postpone that till our next meeting and then likely give 2 updates in our next meeting. I don't want to misstate or say anything incorrect that happened at that board meeting until I have the official minutes. But if there are questions on that, we could probably answer some questions. Just a comment I would make, that was a long, big board meeting, some really important stuff, long board meeting, but I think it was handled very well. And as I watched the RACs and watched the board meeting for such a major issue, the elk plan, it was very surprising how positive it was. Overwhelmingly, people were in support. There's always little things that people want to change and some minor changes, but the plan as a whole just had overwhelming support for it. So it appeared as though the general consensus among the RACs and among the public was they were ready for a major change. And also the elk committee did a good job of putting together the new plan. So, but with that, I think what I'd like to do is just actually wait on those minutes until our next meeting so I have the official minutes. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kevin, for the regional update.
Thank you. If you could pull that presentation up for the regional update, either, are you doing that, Mike, or we do? Paul, if you could pull that up. This will be a short presentation or a short update because we just had a meeting a few weeks ago, as Braden indicated. Go to the next slide, please. From our wildlife section, next slide. They're continuing to do deer classification. That seems to be going well. Fawn to doe ratios look good. I think our deer populations are on the rebound. It'll take a while to get back and more years of good weather to get back to where we need to be with our deer populations. But I think we'll see deer populations increase and a lot of young bucks on the landscape next year. We are still collecting CWD samples from 4 of the units in our region, the Penguich, Zion, Pine Valley, and Paunsaugunt. We completed our Zion Desert Bighorn sheep capture and disease sampling and collaring and did our Beaver Dam sheep census. We do have some deer captures coming up. The 14th and 15th will be here on the Monroe. And if any of the local RAC members or others want to get involved with that, I'm sure Vance could help you, and I'd be happy to have people come and be part of that. And then we'll be down on the Pine Valley the 16th and 17th. Now, I will say those are all contingent on weather. If we get bad weather on one of the captures that's happening in one of the other regions, it bumps everything. And so we never know when it's going to happen really until the day before. But those are the dates that we are targeting right now. We'll be doing on the plateau complex of units, we'll be doing elk flights in January and February, and then doing a big collaring study of elk on that complex starting in March. Next slide, please. We're continuing to do some turkey trapping and revising the release sites with some new plans, but we've got turkeys in Parowan and other places that are in and around town that we've been moving out to places where they're more appropriate. We also have our winter raptor surveys and Christmas bird counts going on, and that's another opportunity for members of the RAC to get involved if you have an interest. Next slide, please. From our habitat section, next. Lots of projects going on. As you can see there, over 42,000 acres of restoration work going on in the region right now. We put 2 new parking lots in at Bicknell Bottoms that got a lot of use during the pheasant hunt over the last several weeks, and hopefully will continue to get a lot of use as the waterfowl hunt continues. We will start our seasonal road closures starting January 1st that we do every year, and we've been monitoring the various easements that we hold in the region. Next slide, please. Outreach has next slide. Lots of things coming up. First dedicated hunter season's wrapping up, but a reminder to turn in your unfilled tags for any dedicated hunters that are listening that haven't done that. The fishing guidebooks that for the regulations that go in effect in January are being delivered and will be out in the next week or so. We will have a bald eagle viewing event in January in southern Utah. Adam, do we have a location on that yet?
It'll be at the Rush Lake site north of Cedar, between Cedar and Minersville.
Okay, so out at Rush Lake between Cedar and Minersville. Also the Snow Goose Festival out around in the Delta area in February. And then lots of hunter ed seminars will be going on in February to accommodate young hunters and new hunters getting ready to be able to put in for the draw beginning in March. And then the National Archery in the Schools regional tournaments will be going on in March as well. Next slide, please. From our law enforcement section, next slide. Busy fall as it always is for our law enforcement folks. Now's the time when they're wrapping up their reports and working with county attorneys on cases and trying to get everything taken care of that way. We do have officers preparing for there'll be a jury trial in Kane County for an Arizona deer tag that was filled in Utah on the Utah side of the border there on the Arizona Strip. And that's all I have because it's short and sweet because we just had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, but is there any questions? Berland?
When we were talking about buffalo, we asked about infrared cameras to help count. Has that gone any further? Because it seems to me like especially this time of the year on these elk flights, you could probably see them better in, if they're in the deep cover, but it sounded like, that maybe that would be a pretty good idea, and I'd like to see them pursue that.
So Verland, I know that there was a discussion that happened. I don't know where it went in it with our Salt Lake office staff that schedules and does all those. I will have to find out and report back to you on where those conversations are at right now. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, before we go into our first action item, let me just welcome all the people that are here. This is a little surprising how many people came to this RAC. I expected it to be a little quieter, so appreciate you coming here. Appreciate your interest. Let me just encourage you, if you're here, we want to hear from you. We'd like to hear your questions and comments, so please don't hesitate to participate. As a reminder of how the process works, what we'll do is we'll have a short presentation on the different agenda items. At the end of that, we'll have questions from the RAC and then questions from the public. On the questions from the public, you don't need to fill out a comment card. Just come up to the mic and state your question. After questions, we'll do comments from the public. On the comments, you will need to fill out a comment card. So if you're here, again, we encourage you to comment. We want to hear your feedback. We want to understand your perspectives, but you do need to fill out a comment card and turn that in. So please get those filled out and hand them to one of the division employees here, and they can bring them up front. And just a reminder, we don't have many problems with this. It seems like from years gone by, but just a reminder that this is a time for public comment, but we don't want to get heated. We want to keep it all very professional and state our opinions and state our comments, but let's try to keep any disagreements we have down to a minimum. So with that, let's dive into the first item, which is the Utah Prairie Dog Conservation Strategy, and Kim Hersey's presenting that online, I believe.
Hi, thank you everyone for having me. And just to give a tiny bit of background on this, I hope you were all able to watch the presentation. Our ultimate goal with the Utah prairie dog as a state is to delist the species so it no longer needs to be on the endangered species list as a threatened species. So for a species to be delisted, it needs to have large enough populations, its threats need to be eliminated or controlled, and there also needs to be adequate regulatory mechanisms in place so the species doesn't backslide to the point it would need protections again. So this conservation strategy that we've worked with a lot of partners and the associated administrative rule are what would go in place upon delisting. And this is how Utah prairie dogs would be managed when authority would be transferred to the state. So hopefully we can work under this rule and go forward and get the species delisted. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, any questions from the RAC? And just a reminder on this, there was a little bit of confusion in some of the other RACs. We are not going to vote on delisting them. That's not our role. We are discussing the action plan for when they are hopefully going to be delisted, as Kimberly said. So I know there was a little bit of confusion on that, so I thought I'd address that right out of the gate. Any questions? Go ahead, Craig.
I got one question. Used to have lots of prairie dogs till 2018. What happened in Iron County at that time?
You know, I think it's associated with the long-term drought that we've had, especially that lack of summer monsoonal moisture. We know prairie dog populations go through boom and bust cycles, and through a lot of the analysis, we have a lot of that's associated with rainfall. So with these last couple summers of monsoonal moisture, we saw a stabilization to rebound last year, and we expect to have increase going into this following year as well. And just as a quick aside, we also have online our current Utah prairie dog biologists, Barbara Sugarman and Patrick Anderson, and our former prairie dog biologist Jessica Kinross and Adam Cavalunas is in the room, so they can help me out with any questions where I don't have all the information.
I was just going to say on my end, we used to, and Teresa knows this, we used to shoot 600 a year because just to kind of control the population. In fact, I got a prairie dog story I got to tell you. My daughter was out moving sprinklers, and she stopped there along the freeway and shot a few. We had a permit, and I was driving down the frontage road, and the highway patrolman pulled up behind me and turned his lights on. And so I stopped and asked him, and he walked up and asked me, you own this property and all this? And I says, yeah. And he says, got a report of somebody shooting prairie dogs. And I said, yeah, that's probably true. I think my daughter was shot a few down by the freeway earlier today. And his ears perked up, and he says, I says, but we have a permit. We can shoot, I think at the time, I don't remember, but we shoot anywhere from 100 to 200 per month, depending on what the permit says. Anyway, we had a permit, and for so many, and he says, well, next time you start counting, I'd start counting at minus 50. Anyway, we're really excited to see the prairie dogs delisted so that we can handle them a little bit better.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Bart.
So the question, when this is approved by the state, what is the position right now at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to delist? Are they entertaining a petition, or is this going to kind of broadside them?
We have, the Fish and Wildlife Service knows that we've been going through this process, and we've been keeping up to date on the process. So they do know that we will be approaching them with a request to look at the status of the prairie dog.
Have they, I guess, or have they indicated that they're receptive to even entertaining this idea?
Yes.
So Bart, they've been very careful because they can't be what they call pre-decisional. And so they've tried to keep a stay at arm's length so that, because there's no doubt that when this comes through, we will have legal challenges to it. And that's one of the things that can be challenged, is if the Fish and Wildlife Service is pre-decisional. And so they've participated to the extent that they can, but they've purposely kind of kept things at arm's length. They know what we're doing and know that it's coming. They've looked over the data, but they've purposely tried to keep themselves separated a little bit because of the process that's coming.
So I assume there's a population recovery plan that Fish and Wildlife Service has. And are we meeting the metrics under that recovery plan?
Currently, under the current way things are measured, we are meeting the metrics on the Paunsaugunt Recovery Unit, and we are a bit under on the Awapa and the West Desert Unit. The recovery plans aren't, a strict requirement. They're a path, one path that you can use to meet recovery. Part of the conservation strategy is, I think it's been the idea of what prairie dogs count towards recovery in the past. And that prairie dogs that aren't on federal land or a specific land protected for Utah prairie dogs were not credited towards these recovery goals. Sort of with the idea that, post-delisting, we're not really worrying about those animals. With this conservation strategy, we are acknowledging the conservation importance of those animals, and that, even with the different relief mechanisms, there will be prairie dogs on private lands. So our goal is to, have regulations in place that allow relief for people who need it, but also acknowledge the conservation of the importance of those animals and credit those towards recovery.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, she froze.
We lost you, Tammy. If you get your internet working again, put your hand back up. Any other questions? Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, my question, there are two of them. First, this plan, once it leaves here, what's the process for its approval? And then secondly, what's the process for delisting and how long will each of those take, do you anticipate?
You know, we don't have a concrete timeline for the process. After, you know, these RAC meetings, we'll have the board meeting in January. If it's approved, we'll also go to some of the different conservation partners on this plan and look for a formal signature as on a memorandum of agreement. Hopefully that will only take a month or two. Once we get all the signatories to this plan, we'll then go to the Fish and Wildlife Service and make a formal request. Based on other species and timelines, I'm sure it will be at least a couple years down the road before they're able to, you know, either say that a draft delisting rule or, you know, say that the prairie dog doesn't warrant delisting at this time. If they did think it warranted delisting, then it would be, you know, a year or so through the Federal Register process.
Tammy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a handful of them, if you don't mind. Number one, do you have a target number in general? I mean, have they, the Fed's given you a number that needs to be counted or that qualifies as delisting on federal land?
In the recovery plan, it was the same across all three recovery units of 1,000 animals. And that's are just those counted animals on the public and protected lands.
Okay, and then, sorry, my phone rang and kicked me off. That's the joys of rural internet, I guess. So I hope I'm not repeating what anybody else said for the 3 or 4 minutes I was off. So in Beaver County, we've had a lot of concerns with the translocation and that. And so we have what they call the Townsend ground squirrel. And Kevin's fully aware of the issues that we have with that and irrigated cropland. And so what our biggest issues are and our ask, and, you know, one of the first things that I did when I got in office is, you know, we designated protected areas out west that's nowhere near croplands or private property. It is public land. But when you do translocate, how do you determine that? And do you give like a heads up, or is there any, you know, do I have, as a county commissioner in a county, do I have a say-so where that goes?
I guess currently we're, you know, knowing that it's a few years down the road, we haven't spelled out the exact areas where we would do translocations in the future. And currently, you know, those go through the process with the Fish and Wildlife Service and Division of Wildlife. You know, upon delisting, they would, Utah prairie dogs would be subject to the same rules that are currently in place for, you know, all sensitive species and game species and such, that translocation sites would have to be approved through a public process. So we'd work with the county's landowners to determine where those sites make the most sense. And then they'd go through the RDCC process and also through the RAC and board process.
So I don't know that this is a question, might be more of a comment, but it seems like some of the classification sites that I've seen specifically on our some state sections and some BLM ground that's under our allotment make zero to no sense at all. A lot of them have been up on high points up, in the middle of the sagebrush, bounding the county line. And I know for a fact that some of those prairie dogs have landed in Minersville or, come on down the canyon unless somebody's purposely dropped them off. And this has been, probably within 10, 15 years. But it seems to me like they're a little bit more common sense, at least in the places that I've seen them put, that there needs to be some more. I mean, because I know for a fact when they planted some, it's been probably bumping 30 years ago. They did, and I think Kevin knows where I'm talking about. It's up in the middle of our allotment, and they fenced it off and they ripped the ground. They did the Dixie harrow. They put a lot of the PVC pipe, those kind of things in there and planted the dogs. Well, the dogs stayed there all of maybe 5 minutes and decided to build their homes in the bottom of a dry pond. Well, the first time we got the pond filled up, the dogs are gone. I mean, they're, and we don't fill it intentionally. That's the floodwaters and different things like that. But it just seems like there should be a little bit better planning or maybe coordinating with people that are a little more familiar with the on the ground sites. So that's kind of been our issue, just observing it, day to day.
So Tammy, can I respond to that?
Sure.
I hope the fact that all the things that you're talking about were 10 to 30 years ago indicate that we have learned and the process has gotten a lot better. And I think that's the case. There's all sorts of site-specific requirements that things have to have soil depth and vegetation and everything else. But you're right. We've learned along the way. We're better at it now than we were, 10 to 30 years ago. We'll be better at it, 10 to 30 years going, forward as we learn as we go.
Right. Well, and I think, to be clear, and I'll save this for the comment period. I'll shut up now.
I was glad Kevin answered that last comment, so we kept it on the questions. Giving you a hard time, Tammy. Bart, did you have your hand up?
I did. So in the conservation plan, it has a variety of conservation, what do they call them? The strategy partners, the conservation strategy partners. Did they contribute in development of this, or were there working groups that were used to develop the data in this, or are they partners because of the ongoing work they do in doing either establishing policy for prairie dog management or some of the easements and such that they purchase and hold?
Both. We primarily focused on, since it is a conservation strategy and we're looking for signatories and commitments for.
I guess my question is, did they help? What was it, collaboratively written, or did they provide input on our writing? How did that work? On your
Yes, it was collaboratively written. We had a facilitator, SWCA, and all our meetings were attended by especially Forest Service, the Iron County, Garfield County, BLM, and provided input into the plan.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Go ahead, Gene.
Yes, I'd like to know a little bit more about where the wildlife services begins and ends, and where this Utah wildlife begins and ends on the situation that we have now. Who captures and relocates the dogs, and basically that.
Under permits from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, most of the capture and relocation is done by the Division of Wildlife. And occasionally. We do also have a Forest Service. I think Garfield County does some as well.
And if they become unlisted, then will that be a state responsibility?
Yes.
So Gene, let me just add a little bit to that. So right now, we're going to do the work whether it's listed or not, or delisted. The difference is right now we're doing it under the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're setting the rules on when and where we can do it. Once they're delisted, we'll keep doing the work, but we'll be setting the rules on when and where and how it can happen. And so that's the difference there. Right now, they have the regulatory authority. They set the rules that we have to follow. Once they're delisted, we will be able to set our own rules. We'll still be working towards prairie dog conservation, but it'll be under rules that we set through our public process. That's the basic difference.
Okay, appreciate that. Now, just one other little question. You mentioned predator management in your presentation. What happens when an endangered prairie dog is being attacked by an endangered predator?
Luckily, badgers aren't endangered, and that's our biggest problem, so it's not something we've had to worry about.
Boy, it feels like it's going to be a long night. All right, other questions? All right, let's take questions from the public. No questions, and we don't have any comment cards from the
I
public.
think there's some that want to do comments.
Yeah, I would think so. So,
Can you get up, Teresa? Is that a big dinner we had?
is there just one comment card? Are there any additional comment cards from the public? All right, Reed, if you want to go ahead and come up. If you could, yeah, yep, if you can just state your name and then make your comment.
Thank you. Yeah, I am the county planner for Iron County and the Special Services Coordinator for the County Commission. I have a letter that I would like to read into the record and give you a copy of. And I'd like to read the majority of that letter and then just add a few comments along the way. First, appreciate the opportunity to comment and share thoughts of the County Commission, and also representing a number of the municipalities in Iron County, and probably share some of the same sentiment of the other counties, even though I can't speak for them. Since the Utah prairie dog was listed under the Threatened and Endangered Species Act in 1973, Iron County has worked with various partners, including DWR, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, Forest Service, the municipalities, private landowners, developers, adjacent counties, et cetera, to manage the Utah prairie dog populations through numerous planning mediums. Most of the early efforts were very contentious at best. However, over the years, attitudes have changed and become more progressive and cooperative as new ideas were fleshed out to reach the long-term goal of delisting. I have personally been involved for 23 years with the prairie dog issue, and have seen a lot of difference in understanding and progression in terms of the public's understanding of what the role of the county and the local DWR. We had the great blessing of having the DWR manage the prairie dogs for a couple of years. After the lawsuit, the management was given to the state until it was overturned in the courts and given back to the Fish and Wildlife Service. As a result of that action, I think that it helped shape the management strategy that we're under now under the General Conservation Plan. We have had a habitat conservation plan, a low effect habitat conservation plan, a state management, and now the General Conservation Plan. We worked with a number of different consultants in preparing new HCPs, habitat conservation plans, over the years. And what's happening right now, and what's been happening over the last couple of years as this conservation strategy has been prepared, has been night and day in relation to the direction that we're going. And as Kim articulated, how the management strategy would work, and once the prairie dog is delisted, how it could be then managed. Once the major components of delisting, one of the major components of delisting is the requirement to have a plan in place to manage Utah prairie dogs, as Kim explained, once they are delisted. The Utah Prairie Dog Conservation Strategy provides the post-delisting management. It utilizes the vast amount of data collected over the years to better understand the impacts of past and current development, habitat needs, translocation management strategies, and disease control. It also provides assurances to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that management goals will be met through annual monitoring and sets the stage for DWR management at the local and state level. Iron County has been a partner from the start, and over the years have purchased 4 properties or have acquired through various means, totaling over 800 acres that through easements are dedicated and managed for Utah prairie dog habitat. We represent development, agriculture, and landowners in the county to minimize impacts of Utah prairie dogs on local economy while providing adequate protection to the Utah prairie dogs. Iron County agrees with the DWR proposal to institute the conservation strategy once delisting occurs. And through this plan, we will finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, to remove the Utah prairie dog from the act. We are pleased with this monumental step. This is a huge step forward. We appreciate especially Kevin's leadership in regard to what's been happening in the preparation of this conservation strategy, but all of the good folks at DWR that we've worked with over the years, and feel that we have good relationships with the federal agencies, BLM, Forest Service, and the Fish and Wildlife in moving this forward to this point, and feel like this is the right step. Iron County is committed to help manage it in the future and provide resources as we've done in the past to try to make this possible. We wholeheartedly support the DWR's proposal to implement the Utah Prairie Dog Conservation Strategy Plan once delisting occurs. This letter is signed by the 3 county commissioners, Marilyn Wood, Chair, Paul Cousins, and Michael Blake, County Commissioners. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's the only public comment we have. Before we get into the RAC's discussion comments, I think we did receive letters from the BLM, the Forest Service, and then also from Beaver County. And I'm wondering if we may want to just provide Tammy the opportunity to address the Beaver County one, where she's a Beaver County commissioner.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if Chuck or Dan, if you want to speak to the letters from the Forest Service and BLM.
Yeah, just a little background before we go there. We've presented the conservation strategy individually to Iron and Garfield County Commissions. They've both indicated a desire to sign the MOA that Kim indicated as partners. I'm on the agenda to present it to Beaver County in later this month. I anticipate they may have a desire to sign on on the MOA as well. And so having the counties as partners in implementing this is huge, and it'll actually go a long ways in helping us to get past the legal challenges that will come, because they will. There's no doubt about it. So with that, maybe Tammy can summarize Beaver County's comments, and we can go from there.
Well, I might just read the letter. It's pretty short, if you don't mind. We definitely are in support of the conservation plan and want to get these delisted. We respectfully submit the following comments. The delisting of Utah prairie dogs is a high priority in order to remove them from the federal protections of the Endangered Species Act. Once delisted, these animals will be managed solely by the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources under the proposed conservation strategy rather than the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The objectives in this strategy are to continue to maintain healthy populations of prairie dogs throughout the species range. The goal of having the prairie dogs delisted under state management is something we all want, something that Beaver County fully supports. So we find that a primary strategy for maintaining populations is through translocation efforts. Prairie dogs located on privately owned lands, whether residential areas or cultivated croplands, should be moved to locations on public lands where they can live unmolested. Prairie dogs are a nuisance animal when they are found on private lands such as residential areas, parks, cemeteries, golf courses, cultivated cropland, etc. These animals need to be removed and relocated to public land far away from developed private land where their existence is not intrusive into the human environment. Our concern over the conservation strategy and efforts to translocate the prairie dogs lies in the fact that there are limited potential habitat locations available, and many of the proposed sites are within several miles of existing agricultural lands. As prairie dog habitat is crowded out by human development and expansion, they are left with less and less desirable habitat options. This habitat loss is the reason for their tenuous existence in the ESA listing. The remaining locations on public lands to relocate prairie dogs are often less than ideal, and good locations are becoming harder to find. Many of the sites that have been chosen are not far from developed private land. We have seen how they can and will travel several miles to reach the agricultural fields. Anyway, that's it.
Thanks, Tammy. Dan, did you want to speak to the CLM?
Sure. Yeah, I'll read a letter of support that we have as well. For the conservation plan, dear Mr. Since the Utah prairie dog was listed in 1973, state and federal agencies, including the Bureau of Land Management, along with local governments, nonprofit organizations, and private landowners, have worked together to protect, conserve, and restore populations of Utah prairie dog. Decades of work, research, funding, and collaboration have gone toward the stabilization and recovery of this species. Because of these recovery efforts, Utah prairie dog populations have grown and are shown to be stable. The Utah Prairie Dog Conservation Strategy establishes the goals and objectives in the Adaptive Framework Plan to implement conservation and management of the species for the foreseeable future, regardless of listing status. Cutter Country and Prairie River districts of the Bureau of Land Management support the Utah Prairie Dog Conservation Strategy. Signed by Gloria Tibbetts, District Manager, as well as Harry Barber, District Manager of Prairie River District.
Thanks. And Chuck?
Yeah. Ours is real similar to Dan's. We've worked together on the comments on the plan. And so it says, Dear Braden Richmond, Chair of the Southern Region RAC, since the listing of the Utah prairie dog as endangered in 1973, the Dixie and Fish Lake National Forests have been involved in the conservation of this species. Coordinated efforts between the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources and many state, federal, and private partners have created a strong coalition for the conservation of the Utah prairie dog among these organizations, leading to habitat-wide increases in prairie dog populations. The Utah Prairie Dog Conservation Strategy was created to ensure the continued preservation of Utah prairie dogs should the species be federally delisted. We've reviewed the conservation strategy and believe the goals, objectives, and strategies create a management framework that will assure the long-term viability of Utah prairie dog populations. Therefore, we approve the conservation strategy and support the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources and their continued efforts to preserve this species. Signed, Michael Elson and Kevin Wright, Forest Supervisors of the Fish Lake and Dixie National Forests, respectively. And if I could, I'd just like to add that I lived here and worked here 15, 20 years ago, and I've moved back about 3 years ago, and it's just been really refreshing. I kind of was here at the time that Reed was talking about when things were a little bit tougher and contentious, and then I came back, and the coordination between state and federal agencies and Fish and Wildlife Service is excellent. The teams are really supportive, and they've come a long ways, and the management of the prairie dog is really changed, and I've just been really happy with what I've seen when I've come back. So
Great. Thanks, Chuck. All right. Additional comments from the RAC. Go ahead, Craig.
I'm really happy to see this. I didn't think this day had come. If you have to deal with them like we have to, and the damage they do when they're really bad, it was a relief when the state had control them for a couple of years, and we were able to work with Kevin and control them a little bit better. Like I say, when we were shooting 600 a summer, we probably had, I don't know what the multiplier is. Teresa probably knows, but it's probably 2,000 on our property, and that's enough to get Iron County delisted. So we're happy to get it. And they didn't count any of those as towards recovery. And we got BLM on one side and the I-15 on the other side, and they don't count them on the right of way of I-15 either. So we were stuck. So.
Other comments? Go ahead, Gene, and then Bart.
Well, I'm really surprised that things have gone so well in the last few years, because there was a lot of animosity among everybody about the prairie dogs, those that wanted them controlled and those that wanted them obliterated, and it's come a long ways. I really appreciate Kevin, the region's efforts in getting this squared around, and I think we've got a good thing going here. I think you've worked on a good plan, and it looks like a good future for the prairie dogs and for the people that have to put up with them. I know that there was a lot of unhappy people in Prairie when they decided to colonize the graveyard there, and it was a bad situation, and we appreciate it. At first, there wasn't anything they could do about it, or didn't seem to be anything they could do about it. And then they came in and took care of the problem.
I'm a little uncomfortable with my name being thrown around as much as it is tonight. There's other people in this room and online that deserve a lot more of the credit than I do. Adam being one of them, was in our prairie dog program for 10 years, Adam?
Including seasonal time, 15.
Adam and then Jessica Kinross, they've both recently taken other positions, but they were a huge part of getting us to where we are now. And then Barbara and Patrick that are online have continued that. And then Keith Day, who was part of the program for 25 years, and he evolved a lot himself as the process came. And Teresa started her career in the Utah Prairie Dog program. So this has been a long time coming, and a lot of people have contributed. And Reed and some of the people in the counties have been as instrumental as anybody in getting us to where we are now. So.
Yeah, just a comment. Want to echo what Chuck had to say about the partnership between the state, federal agencies, local county governments, private landowners, but I think some of the people that are always overlooked are the grazing permittees. Grazing permittees really come to the table because when translocation occurs from private land to public land, it impacts someone's allotment. And there was a lot of animosity when I first got here. I've been here for 17 years and have been part of working with prairie dogs for quite a bit of my career in Cedar City, BLM. But a lot has changed with the grazing permittees, and I think a lot of trust has been built, hopefully with the BLM and Forest Service, with the permittees as well. And a lot of lessons learned have occurred over the years as well. We're committed from BLM, and I think U.S. Forest Services too, but I don't want to speak for Chuck, but we're committed to continue habitat improvement projects on BLM, and that will help support prairie dog translocation and will help support the conservation plan too. And BLM and Forest Service both also commit quite a bit of money to apply Delta dust for plague control with prairie dogs as well. And that's going to be a pretty key component in maintaining the population in the long term. So all that's spelled out in the conservation plan. But again, I think recognition of the grazing permittees should be discussed as well, because they've come to the table and we've worked actively with them in identifying translocation areas that will have minimal impacts on their operations, and we also have flexibility to maintain their operations as well.
Thanks, Dan. Tammy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Dan kind of beat me to it. So I want to say amen to what Dan did. There's a lot of permittees that I know of that they've worked through some projects and some improvements on that, and it's made a world of difference. It's always better managed on a local level than the federal government. So I appreciate what the Cedar office and those guys and the coordinating efforts over there in Garfield County. I know they've moved a lot of dogs, and I appreciate that. I hate to be hateful, but we don't want the Iron County issues in Beaver County. That's always been our problem. We're, like I said, the towns and ground squirrels, we just have a total nightmare with them, and we wouldn't be able to poison them or take care of them. They're not an endangered species, but if we had the prairie dogs in our valley, that would be, a whole nother issue. So I appreciate the work and the effort that's gone in, and hopefully we can get them delisted, and we can keep up the coordinated efforts on the state and local level.
Thanks, Tammy. Any other comments? If not, we'd entertain a motion.
Well, let me summarize online
Oh,
comments.
okay. Let's summarize online comments.
There was one, and it was in support.
I'm sure glad we took time to do that. With that, we'll entertain a motion.
I would make a motion
Yep.
I'll make a motion to support as written.
Great. So we have a motion to
I'll
support as
second.
written, seconded by Craig. Any additional discussion?
Let me just clarify for the record. So what we're actually voting on is the administrative rule that goes along with the conservation strategy. It mirrors it. It talks about just how we're going to implement it. But just for the record, that's what we're actually voting on is the administrative rule. But the administrative rule and the conservation strategy are really a package deal. They go hand in hand.
So my motion is what you said.
I think your motion was accurate. We're good. So Gene,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Chuck,
Yes.
Berlin,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
Tammy,
Yes.
Bart,
Yes.
Austin,
Yes.
and Chad. We're glad to see you've joined us.
Yes.
Great. Motion passes unanimous. All right. Agenda item number 6, the Black Bear Management Plan. So we'll give a couple minutes to Darren to kind of bring us up to speed, and then dive in.
Let's shuffle here. So the only thing I really have, Mr. Chairman, is I just want a point of clarification on the presentation. Kirk Player, who was a member of the Plan Review Committee, I had on the original slide that he represented backcountry hunters and anglers. And that was just a result of a miscommunication. When we asked Kirk initially, it was just my understanding that he was with that group. And at the first meeting in Central Region, it was clarified that he's not officially part of that group. So he did represent sportsmen, and he does sit on the Southeastern Region RAC. So, and he did a really good job on the committee. I just want to make sure we're totally clear. Everybody understands that. Other than that, I'm happy to answer questions unless you want me to go into anything else.
No, I think you did a great job on the online presentation.
Thanks.
So hopefully everyone was able to watch that. Questions from the RAC? Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. My first question is about baiting. I'm not familiar with baiting in this state. I should be. I've hunted here much of my life, but I moved away for 15 years and I was living in Washington State, and I'm more familiar with what they do up there. But
Sure.
So your proposal says that we're going to limit bait users to a 55-gallon, maximum 55-gallon drum. And my question is, have we always had a container
No, so
requirement?
actually what we're recommending is that become an option. Up until now, you haven't been allowed any kind of container. Some of our other neighboring states do allow it. The representative from the Forest Service on the committee felt like, putting it in a barrel might actually improve things out there. You don't have stuff scattered everywhere. It might actually contain it and be easier to clean up. So we didn't make it mandatory that you had to use one, but you could, and we made it a metal container. We felt like that'd be less likely to get torn up and scattered.
Okay. All right. There was one individual who said, can we set a bait season in the fall? And in your presentation, you basically said we don't want to overlap the pursuit season or the spot and stock season
Right.
with the, and so I guess that's the reason you don't want to have a bait
Yeah, I
season
mean,
then
we
too?
discussed this, for quite a while, and really what it came down to is trying to shoehorn that. When you take the fall hound season and you're not allowing it, you don't want any overlap between bait and hounds. That was one of the primary concerns we were looking at. And then you have a spot and stock season begin at the beginning of that muzzleloader deer. There just was only about a 2-week period we could shoehorn in a bait season. And where we landed was, is that really enough time? Maybe we can extend the spot and stock. And the group, most people felt like that'd be a better option. So that's what we did. And Braden was on the committee, so.
Yeah.
Darren, if you don't mind, if I
Yeah,
add
absolutely, yeah.
a little more to that. On the committee, so I did sit on the committee, and on the committee, there was a bait hunting representative and then also Utah Bowman's Association representative, which are primary, they primarily hunt over bait. And neither of them felt like losing that fall season was really impactful. They felt like it was pretty minimal. I was kind of surprised at that. I didn't want to give up that fall bait season, but the representatives that would represent that best felt like that losing that fall season was acceptable.
Okay.
We just don't, of the number of bears taken over bait, that ranges between 10 and 20% of all bears taken over bait. Just, there weren't a lot of bears being taken in the fall over bait. And we felt like.
So 80% are taken in the spring over.
Right,
okay.
during that June hunt, yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about the CRR. We had, in the past, the Forest Service would be responsible for issuing a permit to somebody to put a bait station and looking into that, making sure that they were complying with the rules. And then 4 or 5 years ago, that went to the DWR. And then this proposal is that I guess I'm a little confused about how we're going to manage that or how we're going to enforce.
So we set out the rules. You can't be within a certain distance of a road or a campground, et cetera. I think and Kevin, if you remember, Kevin was here before me and it's been a while, but I think the discussion with the Forest Services at the time is that they were comfortable with our restrictions. The discussion in this committee was, these folks are adults. These are the rules. We shouldn't have to hold their hand and approve every single bait station. It's a big lift for our folks in the region and for our biologists. And so as far as I know, based on the comments in the committee, the Forest Service is still comfortable with those restrictions. BLM has always wanted folks to come and clear stuff with them. I don't think the Forest Service has the bulk of those bait stations. But there's other things was concerned about beyond what our regulations are, and they wanted to still be able to do that. So I think I could see as our leadership continues to meet with Forest Service that some of that may change. We'll see how things go. But in terms of the committee, the Forest Service rep on the committee felt comfortable doing this.
Darren, I'll try not to chime in too much. But
No,
can
I
add a little more
appreciate
to
it because
this
I
one
don't
also?
remember everything.
So there was a Forest Service rep on the committee, and they actually took, between the meetings, they went back and spoke with their supervisors, and I don't know who it is at the Forest Service, to make sure they were still on board with this, and they came back and reported that this plan looked good and this method was good. In addition to that, if you haven't had the opportunity, there's a very interactive site, I think on the division links to it, that shows you where baiting's allowed. And I'll tell you what, it limits you quite a bit.
Yeah.
If there was water there in the last 100 years, you can't put a bait close to it. So it's very limiting. It's pretty aggressive.
Okay. Well, one other question, I guess, if that's okay. On regarding pack size, have we, and I'm not familiar with this issue at all, so
Right.
have we ever had a limitation on pack size?
We used to not have a pack size limit. We did have some limits on restricted pursuit units, like on some of these high bear density units, like the LaSalle's, the San Juan, and spring pursuit. But otherwise, there was no limit. We had a case, I think in 2018, where there was some concern about the number of dogs afield in that particular case. And we also had the Forest Service come to us and say, there are just too many dogs in these campgrounds. We can't keep track. So we actually put a group together 3 or 4 years ago, specifically looking at some of the concerns with user conflict on the LaSalle's particularly, but also talking about the San Juan and the Book Cliffs, the kind of the high profile units. And one of the things that came out is we can limit, we don't have any authority over the land, how many dogs can be in a campground. That's something the Forest Service would have to enforce. But we felt like putting a cap on the number of dogs that could be used in a pursuit at 16. So that was the first time we capped it statewide. This did come up in the committee again. We revisited it. The houndsman on the committee explained that, sometimes if you've got a large male bear, it really is better to have more dogs than less. That bear's more likely to tree if there's more dogs pursuing. If you don't have enough dogs, that bear could run for an hour, and then you have problems with the bear becoming incapacitated or dogs getting injured. And so we felt like 16 was still a reasonable number, and 8 on those spring pursuits. It's continued on that. So that's where we landed. So that, no change, but we did make some changes 3 or 4 years ago on that.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Verlin.
Bart has a question.
Looking at your committee and the representation there, it looks like agricultural producers are really underrepresented. You've got the wool growers, you don't have Farm Bureau, you don't have Cattlemen's Association.
Sierra's a pretty good advocate.
Well, I'm
For
sure
producers.
she is, but
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
I mean, you've got archery, houndsmen,
Mm-hmm.
big game hunters, bait hunters. I'm just hoping that from the looks of that committee, that there's a underrepresentation of the agricultural community, and we should have a big say in the management plan.
Right, yeah.
Because
I hear where you're coming from, Verlin. I don't know if it'll help you feel any better, but a lot of the sportsmen on that committee, in addition to Sierra, wanted to make sure that producers were covered. We've done a lot in the last 5 or 10 years on making sure people could get permits if they've got depredation, and Sierra was pretty good about making sure that none of that stuff got watered down. But I do understand your point.
Okay, and another question is one of those graphs that showed all the incidences that
Mm-hmm.
was in the 70s, and down below the reason, I don't know what it was called, where they resolved it or took the bear.
Yeah, we
was
could probably pull that up.
was real
Maybe
low.
if you want to show that, Verlin, if that helps.
I couldn't see the numbers exactly, but there was a big gap between the incidents and the
numbers taken.
numbers taken.
Yeah. So, I mean, generally, not always, but a lot of times when you're talking about incidences, so that's anytime Wildlife Services gets called out to verify livestock depredation. And for bears, at least, that sometimes can be one bear, and it can sometimes be multiple bears. And Wildlife Services will attempt to take that animal if it's killing, but sometimes it either doesn't come back or they're unable to catch it or
Emphasis on the attempt. So.
right. But that's really so incidents you'd expect to be, I don't know that you'd expect them to take a bear. Well, I guess you'd expect them to take a bear in every incident, And sometimes they take more than one. They took quite a few on that strawberry. We had quite a bit of depredation in that strawberry country, and I think they took 30 bears out of there that were coming in and killing sheep. So it kind of depends on the incident, but yeah, your point's well taken. And so go back. It's like slide number 5, Mike, just so everybody can see what we're all talking about. Paul, yeah, number 5, Paul, that's one we're all talking about. There. Nope. One more. There you go. Nope. Go back. There. Good. So yeah, that's the blue line are the number of bears that Wildlife Services removed, and then the orange line are the number of incidences over time. And that's from 2001 to now, so the last 21 years. You know, overall, it remains fairly stable over time as far as number of incidences and number of bears taken. You can see it jumps around, but you know, if anything, over the last 10, we may see a slight decrease, but when a bear's eating your sheep, that's not much consolation, so take it with a grain of salt.
Go ahead. Actually, Bart had his hand up, and then we'll come back over to you, Craig.
First question. So since the DWR will no longer be reviewing, bait sites, and you said this is because it's a really heavy lift for the team, do you have a history of, what is the history of, illegal bait sites or ones that didn't comply with the regulations? Do we have any record of that? Is that something that's tracked? So
What we're recommending is that we don't preemptively approve a bait site. We say, here are the regs, but you'd still have to register your bait site on our website, and then law enforcement will follow up. So if your bait site is somewhere it shouldn't be, you're too close to water or whatever, they'll review them in the field. And they do that anyway. So we'll continue to do that. We have had a few cases. I couldn't enumerate it. I don't know. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I will if I have to, as far as law goes. But yeah, they're doing that. They're in the field checking these, and we'll have a map still of where people place their baits. One thing that law has told me is really helpful is to know where the legal ones are supposed to be, and then if they find one that's not on the map, then it's a little bit quicker lift for them to follow up on an illegal bait site that's not registered. So the big difference here is that we won't look at every single one of them when they register and say yay or nay, but we will.
What process do you use now when you look at those? Is it just a map, like a GIS map survey?
Yeah, and what we're doing is we're looking to see that they're not too close to water and they're not too close to roads, and that's really it. So it's the same criteria. I think the group just felt like we don't do that for very many other hunting groups. Hold their hand through the process. Here are the regs. You need to comply. Here's where you register your bait station. And we will follow up. Law enforcement will be looking into that. And if they see some that look like they're in the wrong spot, then they'll follow up on that.
Okay.
Bart, just a point of clarification there, and I want to make sure we understand this, is the bait sites are still registered. They can still be the site, and the map that you register them on shows all the areas that you can't put one. So it's just a matter of going into the office and actually signing off on it. It's the only thing that's changed.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I think the importance is that law enforcement is out there checking. That's the only, and they're doing that still, so that's fine by me.
Yeah, they absolutely
are. And another question is, for the mandatory orientation course, could you explain again, is that just because they're not supposed to take female bears, or is it just so they can report the difference?
So I think initially we've implemented education a couple of times over the years. One in 2005, it wasn't mandatory, but we started making that available online. And then in 2015, it became mandatory. And the discussions I recall around that, and from the records I could find, it was always about, let's try and minimize female take. So we educate people about how to tell the difference. When I started looking at the data, and the graph is in the presentation, it looks like hunters are taking females at the same rate that Wildlife Services is, who theoretically are taking bears as they become depredating bears. And I think there's a strong argument that that orientation is not effectively reducing the number of females in the harvest. Now, that doesn't mean we won't still provide those materials. We'll provide bear hunters with the same kind of materials that we do now, but you won't have to go online, pass the course as you put in. Right now, you have to do that, but when you put in, you may or may not draw a bear permit. And if you're trying to put in for your kids or just for a bonus point, you still have to go through this, and you're working your kids through, and depending on how many kids you have, you're going through this orientation over and over and over again. And I just
The
don't.
only requirement,
Go ahead.
I mean, there's no, the tag, and again, I'm not a hunter, so the tag doesn't say male or female, it just says bear. So
Right.
unless there's it's just a guidance to not take females. Is that correct?
Right. We discourage it. Those are the reproducing. Honestly, it depends on the management strategy. There are some units where we're trying to reduce bear numbers, and we would want them to take females, and that's reflected in the management parameters. But yes, we want people to know in the field what they're looking at. And
So is that 18% kind of the general, I mean, what's the female to male ratio of bears in our Utah population?
I think the way to get at that is pursuit data. So how many females do they treat compared to males? And I think last I looked, it was something like 1.2, 1.5 females per male. So it's pretty even, but a little bit more females in the field.
Okay. It seems that in those areas, well, that's just discussion, not question. So, okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Craig?
My question deals with deprivation too. A rancher is losing calves or losing sheep, well, mainly sheep to bears, but and you have someone come out and document it. Was there any discussion as to a multiplier? Because if you're losing one, you probably lost 3 or 4.
Yeah.
The
So
same
we
animal,
didn't
you
talk
just
about it.
documented one. Is there any discussion as to that, addressing that problem?
We didn't discuss it in this committee, but we actually helped fund a study through Utah State University looking at how many are you losing for every one you find. And we're looking at sheep bands. Both bears and cougars seem to, I mean, they'll obviously kill calves, but mostly it's a sheep thing. And so we got some data on that. That one person, we had legislators interested in the results of that. And beyond that, I can't say. I don't know where it might go from there, but it definitely was an interest from the producing community and what, how many are we missing? And Wyoming does have a multiplier, and it depends on where you are in the state. But we've got some producers that run in Wyoming, and they're pretty keen on trying to get something like that here too. Go ahead.
So Craig, I just say the reason that wasn't discussed, there's a whole different policy that deals with depredation and how we handle depredation and how we compensate people. So there's a lot of discussion going on about that. It wouldn't happen under this rule. It'd happen under the other rules and policy that go with specifically to that. So,
And I think it would need to be a statute change in order to do that. So it'd have to go to the legislature.
Gene, go ahead.
The bait season will run from 30 May to the end of June.
Right.
I'm wondering, doesn't the quality of bear hide diminish quite a bit around
As they enter
from
summer,
May
the hair, the pelt does diminish. I don't think that you're gaining much early in the fall by doing it in the fall, but Yeah, they're potentially, yeah, for sure. You could have less of, they're going to lose that winter coat and be a little bit more, I don't know if patchy is the right word, but it won't be quite as thick.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure everybody would like to get them when they're prime, but
Right.
there's only so many days in the year.
That's
and so
the
many
thing. And it's
seasons.
just, it's like big game. There's only so many months in the fall, and how do you shoehorn it in and not overlap? One thing I didn't mention, one of the things that the director asked us as a group to do is try to simplify bear hunting so that it's a lot more understandable what's going on, and then do away with some of these overlaps. We've got conflicts in the fields.
Well, that was a worthy plan to
Yeah.
simplify that.
I think
But-
compared to big game, we did a pretty good job.
But here a year ago or so, everybody or a bunch of got their knickers in a bind and afraid that with the drought, the predators were going to decimate the deer herds. And so they made a lot of efforts to liberalize bear take and cougar take.
Mhm.
Now, from what I saw on the chart, it didn't happen, that you had less harvest this last year
Yeah,
than you've
we did.
had before.
So we didn't make a lot of changes to our bear. We have a policy that for bear, you'd put it into a liberal harvest strategy if you felt like you had a bear problem in terms of particularly mule deer. And we don't have a lot of units. I don't think we have any bear units that are in there. We do have liberal units, but on the lion side, we definitely liberalized across the state. And we're a couple of years into that lion plan. We'll see how things look after 3 years and see what we got. South Manti looks like it actually really helped to reduce those densities of lions.
So, do you have any information on bears as far as their kill of deer?
Typically, if you're going to see an issue, it'd be in your fawns. Bears will key in and kill fawns, and it's a short window. It's just a short window while they're vulnerable. But so the potential's there, but I don't know that we've seen it in any of our fawn-specific mortality. Coyotes usually is the bulk, and then you've got cougars taking quite a few. Bears don't really show up. The only other thing with bears would be if they're stealing lion kills, and then the lion has to kill more often in order to. But again, we're actually looking at that with USU. We don't have any answers definitively yet. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, Gene, the data we have on that indicates because deer disperse, they don't have their fawns near each other. A bear may stumble across the fawn once in a while, and if they do, they'll take it. Where bears can have a bigger impact is on elk calves, because elk will get in those big nursery herds, and you'll have a bunch of elk calves in one place. And if a bear stumbles into one of those, then if it's in that first 2 weeks, and it's a really short window,
Yeah.
but they can do some damage in an elk herd in that first 2 weeks. Deer, like I said, because they're dispersed, it's less of an issue.
Thanks, Kevin.
Any additional questions? Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, you got me curious now when
Okay.
when they said, how many are they missing when they're looking for depredating?
Right.
How many are they missing? I can't
See,
stop
now
thinking
I'm
about
trying
it,
to,
sorry.
so they looked at multiple predators, and I'm trying to pull that from my memory banks. But I do remember some of the initial numbers we looked at, like about 3 to 1 for lions. So, for every one you found, there's 3 in the brush somewhere that you just don't ever know they're gone. I mean, you count them, they're missing at the end, but disease and coyotes by far are the 2 biggest, at least on these units. And these are going to be the manti and the cache, so more north. So whether we look at that in the south or not is something we could discuss, but we didn't look down here.
The other issue with sheep in particular is they'll just consume the whole thing. There's no evidence left. So there's nothing to find.
So what they did in this study is they actually collared the lambs. And so they were up listening for lambs. They did about 200 per band. And we're just listening for that mortality signal and get in on it as soon as that lamb wasn't moving, they'd get in there and determine what killed it. And that's where they came up with those numbers.
All right, let's go to questions from the public. While we're taking questions from the public, just a reminder, as of right now, we don't have any comment cards. So turn in those comment cards. If you want to comment, we'd encourage you to comment. We want to hear your thoughts. So, but let's start with questions from the public. Well, there's a lot of people here for no questions and 2 comment cards. That's all right. 3 comment cards, good. Let's go ahead and start with JJ Brewer.
Matt, did you want to turn in a comment card too?
Maybe.
We'll see how it goes.
I just see it there in your hand, so.
JJ, if you want to go first, and then after JJ, we'll have Kelly.
No, this one's trapping.
Oh, after that, we'll have, so there are just 2 comments. Scott.
Okay, yeah, my name is JJ Brewer, representing the Utah Houndsman Association tonight. We appreciate all of you, appreciate the Southern RAC, and we appreciate the Bear Committee that was put together and the hard work that was put in there. And I know there was a lot of meetings, a lot of thought, and a lot put into that. So we support what you've done, support the plan, and again, appreciate all you do.
Thanks, JJ. And Scott.
Scott Stubbs, Iron County Farm Bureau, wool grower, an involuntary wolf, bear feeder. Yeah, let's not get into the wolves. So I like the comment about the multiplier. I believe with our bears and our lions, we need to consider that going forward. And I realize this isn't the place. I do really appreciate the way that the divisions worked with us when we have losses. We have the 96 hours. We can just go get them killed. I had a bear kill last summer. I was able to kill the bear that very day. I know I got the right bear. I like that. And I also like the way that you've supplied us with depredation tags if we can't do it that way. And I do appreciate that. Depredation is a big deal. It's getting worse. I'm losing more to lions and bears than, I've been in this business 33 years and I'm had a lot more trouble the last 3 years than the 30 before. So thank you.
Thanks, Scott. That's all the comment cards we have. Just want to make sure none of the rest of you want to comment. All right, let's go to comments from the RAC. Go ahead, Craig.
Just a couple things to back up what Berlin talked about on the committee. You were on the committee. I'm sure Scott's got a whole different perspective of bears than you do, and the problem with bears.
Yeah, I'm sure he has a different perspective, but I don't know that we don't agree.
Okay.
And let me speak to that real quick, Craig. I think that's a valid point, that there wasn't a lot of representation. At the same time, I can assure you that Sierra was, what you lacked in quantity, you made up for in quality.
Okay, and I'm not a wool grower, so I don't know. I don't even know Sierra, but anyway. And I'd just like to comment on the deprivation. I'm sure the reason Scott, these guys are seeing more problem with deprivation is because the deer herds are down. And so they've got to eat something. So that's I'm sure that's what their problem is. And the other thing is I'd like to see something done on this multiplier deal. I don't know where we need to go do that, but we need to pursue that.
Thanks, Craig. Tammy, go ahead.
I'll put my hand down so I don't leave it up. I want to reiterate what both Scott and Craig said. When we get into the legislative session, we hear a lot from the producers statewide on depredation, whether it's bears or cougars. And I really do think, just common sense to me says if our deer herds down, they're looking for something else. And the sheep herds specifically are kind of easy prey. But I do want to say I appreciate that the division stepped up. We put a lot of pressure on everybody the last few years. And trying to get that depredation, get the permits and that in the producer's hands so they can chase that bear or chase that lion, be able to shoot them, immediately instead of waiting for some of this other stuff to happen. But also appreciate you guys doing the conversation with Fish and Wildlife Services as well, because that's, we've got to have everybody on the same team working on this. So we appreciate that.
Thanks, Tammy. Austin.
I'll just make a quick comment. I appreciate some of the changes and some of the constituents I've talked to about the bait regulations, the barrel introduction, using other bait sites. I think those are great changes. But I would echo that as much as we try to make this simplified, we continually seem to get away from that. And as someone who takes responsibility introducing new hunters and trying to get them to understand regulations and opportunities, it seems like we continually make this more complicated with more terminology that's unfamiliar and structures that leave out certain units. So I hope as we all think about this going forward, we can make it even better next time and make it easier for everyone to understand.
Thanks, Austin. I'll speak to that real quick. Where I was on the committee, this was one of my primary things going in. I've been pretty vocal about the complexity for years. I guess I would suggest that it is simpler, but by a very small fraction. It's surprisingly difficult to make it simple. And I was very focused that that's one thing I wanted to do. So I agree with you, and I'm frustrated that we couldn't do better, but it was more complicated than I gave it credit for. Other comments? Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, just a couple of comments and I feel kind of bad that we didn't talk with the Forest Service rep sooner on the committee, but there were other Forest Service individuals who have expressed a little bit of concern with using the barrel, that they're afraid that now we're going to have barrels left on the forest, and instead of having less trash, we'll have more. I don't know how that's going to play out, but there is a concern with that. And there's also a concern with the COR process. I know that you have to register online, and we just don't want to lose any accountability there. We've had liability issues where bear baits have been too close to campgrounds and people have been injured, and the Forest Service has paid for those. And we just want to make sure that we continue to inform the hunters and make sure that they're putting things where they need to be, and that if the law enforcement's checking up on it, that's a good step in the right direction to make sure that they're not putting them too close to places where we can have human bear interactions, where a bear's feeding on his donuts and he's pretty excited about it. So those are my comments.
Chuck, can I just comment on that a little bit? No? Okay. I mean, if the Forest Service finds, the good thing about this is if you find a barrel and it's from a registered bear bait, we can track it back to the person that put it there, and they ought to be cited. If you don't, we will, right? So.
I'll make a couple comments. Oh, go ahead, Gene, and then I'll make a couple comments.
I need a couple more questions here if I can. Spot and stock tags. Increasing those?
So they're based on quotas. So, I think it's on screen. Am I good, Mike? Maybe I'm just too tall. Story of my life. Except when I was not tall, I guess. Anyway. So what was your question, Gene? Oh, how many permits there were?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
And if
It's not that late.
If there's a plan to increase.
Yeah, so we're not doing permits tonight, but we'll base all those on a quota. So these are over-the-counter tags. Anybody can go get one, and they can get as many as they want. But once we hit the quota, it would shut down the unit. And when we do permits, we'll be looking at that. We may need, with the new structure, we may be need to look at shuffling some of that around, but that'll take place in a couple of years when we go back to permits again.
Darren, while you're answering that question, could you also address the take? So it was unlimited this year. Could you address, it's a very small
Yeah,
take, even though the tags are unlimited.
Yeah, I think we saw right around 20% success on those permits. So it's low success, but opportunity. It's higher than the Cougar take, but most of them were taken on the LaSalle's out of the quota. I think the quota was 12. They took 10.
So LaSalle's was the highest, I think, with 10. San Juan was the
San Juan
second
was
highest,
6
was
out of 12.
6 out of 12. So we didn't even come close to filling the
Yeah,
quota.
and those are high bear density units where you expect to see higher success. And then statewide, it's really a function of how many bears are there. If you got a lot of bears, people are more successful than if you don't have.
So a bunch of this is, I'm hunting deer or elk, but I've got a bear tag in my pocket.
Right. And one of the things that the legislature asked our director to do a couple of years ago when they did the mule deer protection legislation is to provide opportunity for big game hunters in the fall to have bear or cougar permits. And so that's what we started with, that spot and stock opportunity. Then this expands it. This will actually allow people with archery equipment during the archery season. You don't have to use archery equipment for bear, but you'll be able to hunt spot and stock bear during the archery seasons. So that we felt like that would be good too. We may see more success among archers.
If you got a spot and stock tag, you can't mate up with a houndsman.
No, and there is no hound season during that season. So if you've got dogs in the field after bears,
Okay.
you get in trouble.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
My comment is on spot and stock. When I drew my bear tag, there was just one thing. You drew a bear tag. If you had hounds, then you could hunt them with hounds. And if not, you go out and you have a good time in the spring, chasing around and hoping and so forth. But there was you hoped you could run into one, but if you couldn't, after a little while, there was a bunch of houndsmen out there chasing bears that didn't have a kill tag, and there was those of us that had a kill tag that didn't have any dog. And so we got together, and it worked, and it was good. But if with spot and stock, there's not going to be spot and stockers that are going to be selective about whether it's a boar or a sow. A bear's a bear. It's your one opportunity. You're going to drop the beast unless it's got cubs with it. And so that's the way with spot and stock. It's not going to make any difference what you put out. They're going to take the first bear that they see, because it's going to be the chance in a lifetime for them.
Couple of comments I wanted to make on this. So again, as I said, I sat on this committee, and there was a lot of discussion, a lot of good discussion, and I think we came up with a reasonable plan. As is always said on these committees, you never get everything you want, but I think the plan as a whole was good. One item that we discussed, as was mentioned here, was the orientation. But I'm not sure we discussed one option that came up in the central RAC that I wanted to bring up here. There's reasons why that orientation, and I think Darren did a good job of outlining why the orientation, we felt like it needed to go away. But what we didn't discuss was the idea of, similar to like we do with the antler course, that you have to take it and then just have it on your person when you're in the field. I think that's a very reasonable option that doesn't cause the problems that the orientation course did. So you don't have to take the course just to get a bonus point. You don't have to take it 4 times for all your kids. But once you draw a tag, you need to take it and just have that on your person. It's your responsibility. And we're doing that with the antler already. I think that's a very reasonable option. And I think the course is a good course. So I would encourage us to look at that one change. And the reason I do bring that up, like I said, I don't think we looked at that option during the committee, or I would guess we probably would have been in favor of it. So, and maybe just a couple things I'd address on the baiting. When you look at the barrels, there's a lot of information out there that shows that you'll actually have a cleaner bait site with the barrels. You'll actually end up using less food. To the concern of packing out the barrels, I think Kevin addressed that very well. That's already illegal. You can't leave your barrels there. In addition, you aren't going to be baiting year after year after year. So there's no advantage to leaving your barrel there. The next time you draw a tag is going to be a minimum of, what's the wait period on a bear? Well, but even the wait period is just 3 years. So, I mean, if you got lucky, you're at minimum 3 years. So I don't think that's really concerned. I think what it does allow is a much cleaner bait site when you leave the site. So I would encourage that one. I was trying to think if there's any other clarifications I can add from being on there. Maybe that's it. Go ahead.
I know we're going back to questions now, so I'm not familiar with I looked through the material, but I didn't see anything about the labeling of the barrels. I'm assuming that you're going to have to leave some sort of tag on there that says who this belongs to and you know, phone we call if
The COR in our records would delineate who those are. And one of the things that the Forest Service rep asked in the committee is that we make those maps available to the forests so they know where those bait
yeah, we've
sites
had them
are.
in the past. So
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if I've been looking at so many other states. I think we require signage.
Yeah, so not only do you have to register your site online, so it's registered where you're at, but at your bait site, you have to post that this is a bait site with your COR number on it.
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Gene.
On your comment about having to take an online course and get it certified, I don't see how it's very beneficial. As I mentioned, spot and stock hunters are going to take the bear regardless of sex. Bait hunters, I imagine it depends on how many hits they're getting on their bait, whether they're going to be selective of their bear or not. And houndsmen, I'll guarantee you, they know the sex of every bear they take before they take it. And they're very discriminating. And the best way to protect female bears is to have the houndsmen out there, because they're looking for large boars, and they're discriminating about which bears they're going to take. So I don't really see the purpose of having to do it that way.
Could I suggest one reason, Gene? So I don't see a downside of taking the course would be one response, but let me give you one upside is public perception. We do want male harvest and we want to discourage female harvest on most of our units. And the idea that we have a course and we're requiring you to take it to hunt bears, I think is very good public perception.
Okay, I like that part.
Go ahead, Vernon.
It seems to me, and I'm not a houndsman, but I think instead of large boar, I think large bear is what they'll take. If they tree a big sow, they'll take her because she's big. And so, but yeah, I don't have any problem with having some kind of educational deal to see if you can tell a male from female, but I don't really think it's that big a deal.
Any other comments?
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Bart.
I agree with you. I think there should be some training. I'm not sure that the logical connection was made between 18% of take is a female, just like 18% of depredation take is female. I mean, that's correlation. Sounds great, may not be accurate, or the justification isn't really there. I think that if the goal is to minimize taking females, we need to have some training out there to encourage that, even if it's just public perception. And I was, when I was watching the videos and kind of reading through the packet, I thought the same thing. It's like, I'm not a hunter, but I do go shed hunting, and I have to take this silly course every year. And, it reminds you about stuff. And even if especially if you've got kids or something like that, it's a good reminder to the group that's going to go out hunting. So, and my wife and I go hunting, and I say, make sure you take your shed hunting class. And I explain the reasons why, and I talk about it to people I know. So I think it's a good thing to do, and I think this would be a good addition to this recommendation.
Tammy?
I would have to agree. Being in the public, like I've been the last few years, public perception is perception is reality, whether it is or not, right? And so I think that courses, whether you require them or not, that the simple fact that they're available, I agree with Bart. We do the antler course every year, fill it out and whatever. And I think it is a good reminder to be good players, be responsible. Sometimes in my world, sportsmen are not always good players. We have a lot of issues with that, with, salt in the ponds and salt close to the ponds and cameras all over the water troughs and, gates left open and different things like that. And you can't always blame the sportsman, but that's, usually the first one you want to blame. So I think the more opportunity we have to educate all of us, I think the better it is. But I like the presentation, and I did want to say, as far as the committee goes, I like the cleaner dates, so you don't have as much the overlap. And I appreciate you guys, trying to simplify things. In my mind, it seemed a little bit more simple. Maybe the language isn't, but the dates are. So good job.
I don't think we added complication to the language, but maybe I'm guilty. I don't know. Any other comments? I think we've discussed a lot. Are we ready for a motion?
I would make a motion to approve the plan as presented with the addition of a educational course similar to the shed hunting course, an online course that hunters would have to take.
Okay, so Bart has a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
With a second by Dan. You have that, Kevin?
So I have it stated as a motion to approve the plan as presented with the addition of a required education course. Does that cover it, Bart?
I think we should say similar to, make sure it's an online thing. So just an online certificate course.
Similar to the antler course is a good motion.
Okay, similar to the antler course. Got it.
Okay, any further discussion?
There's one more point.
Go ahead.
And that's
Gene.
when old grandpa puts in for him and 3 kids and 7 grandkids and has to take that course 11 times.
So, Gene, just to be clear, with this motion, only the person with the tag would have to take the course.
So after the
It would be after the draw. So you no longer have to take the course that your kids are supposed to be taking for themselves.
Okay, then we'll go along with it.
All right. Verlin?
All right. I can't remember all of it, but isn't that what this was recommending, an online course or?
No, we were getting, the committee said no online course. And there were several reasons for that. I don't know that we want to go into all those, but we didn't discuss this idea of doing the course afterwards and then you just keeping the certificate on your person.
So Bart, I added to the motion. So the motion reads, as I've got it right now, a motion to approve the plan as presented with the addition of an education course similar to the Antler course that is required after someone obtains a tag, to clarify that. Does that meet the motion?
Was my intent, yes.
Okay.
All right. Any additional discussion?
Yeah, Austin's got his hand up.
Go ahead. Austin.
I was just going to clarify on the semantics of this. Is that, how does it work for a spot and stock, like an over-the-counter tag that you purchase? And is this like a certification or registration number that you would carry with you to have a valid permit? Or Nevada would not send me my permit until I took said course? Thinking about what Lindy's going to say about that.
I won't speak to what Bart's intent were, but let me clarify how this worked in the central, or as this was discussed, is it would be just like a shed antler. Once you have the permit, in order to hunt on that permit, you would have to have that course completion on your person. So it's pretty simple. So if you were checked in the field, you'd be required to have that course completion on you, just like you would with shed hunting. So it really is pretty simple.
Yes, and I even would say, it doesn't have to be the paper copy. If you can take a picture of it, that's the toughest thing, is always having to have the paper copy shoved into your wallet. And if you have a picture on your phone, that should suffice as well.
Yeah, I think that certifies, I would hope.
Yeah.
Any additional discussion? All right. We have a motion, a second. Let's go ahead and vote. Gene?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Berlin?
No.
Craig?
No.
Tammy?
Yes.
Austin?
No.
Bart?
Yes.
And Chad?
Yes.
So passes 5-3.
We've got more than 8 here. 1, 2. Got 9, so 6-3.
6-3. Thanks. Vernon and Craig, do you want a reason for the no vote? You don't have to, but if you'd like to.
Oh, I just don't like this one more thing. I mean, you say it's simple, but there's, like we had in the discussion, there's a lot, going to be a lot to it when you get down to trying to figure it out. And I just think it's just one more thing. I don't need it.
I can understand that. Thank you.
And this, same as it's just complications.
Okay. Austin?
Just simplification for me. I'm trying to get away from having a giant Ziploc full of all my permits and licenses and certifications to go in the field.
Okay. Thank you. I can appreciate that. All right. Agenda item number 7, Furbearer Bobcat season dates.
So I guess the only thing I'd say about this is that all we're really doing is changing dates for the calendar. So nothing real new, other than the 2 areas we're closing to beaver take in the southern region. So I don't know if that's a topic for conversation, but that's kind of where we are with that one.
All right. Questions from the RAC? Go ahead, Vernon.
I'll donate some beaver off Pine Creek to put down there if you got a problem.
Make a note.
Any other questions from the RAC? Questions from the public? We have one comment from Kelly with the Utah Trappers Association. I was trying to figure out what those acronyms were. No, I didn't want to misstate your acronym there, so I figured get it better.
All right. Anyway, my name's Kelly Laird. I'm with Utah Trappers Association. And we want to thank you for giving us the chance to voice our opinion on this stuff. But we want you guys to know that we fully support the recommendations made by the division for the season dates for Furbearers and the Bobcat tag numbers. But I'd like to, if I don't know if this is appropriate time to talk about this, but we would like to make an additional proposal, excuse me, and that'd be to require non-residents to purchase a trapping license or a Furbearer license. Our surrounding states all require the non-residents to get a trapping license before we trap in their states, regardless of what you trap for. And we feel like Utah should follow suit on that. Now, I realize that that our Furbearer license doesn't really cover coyotes, red fox, raccoons, and such. But anyway, it's something that we feel pretty strong about. We'd like to have that considered. And one more thing before I shut up is, as we've heard a few rumors about the possibility of dropping the requirement for the ears on the bounty on the coyotes. And we'd fully support that if you guys are entertaining that idea. Thank you.
Darren, can I ask you to address Kelly's comment there? This is a comment that I've heard come up, and I don't know that I've heard an answer that I understand.
The non-resident?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that at all. The loophole in Utah is that unlike, I think, all of the western states, coyotes are not managed by Division of Wildlife Resources. So we can't require a license, but there's always the chance you're going to take something incidentally. It's fairly commonly, if you're trapping for coyotes, you may catch something that is regulated by the division. And if you remember a few years ago, we required everybody to get a trapping a number. If you're going to put a trap in the ground, you have to register, have a trap registration number. And for this very reason, even if you're trapping for coyotes, you may catch something that you didn't intend to. And so, this didn't make it as part of our discussion, but I'd be supportive if the RAC wants to go that way. And we need to talk to our attorneys, and we can certainly do that between now and the board, but I can't foresee requiring a trapping license if you're going to trap in Utah, regardless of species.
I have one additional question on that, similar, but as I've hunted other states, most other states require a license for me to shoot a coyote in their state.
Right.
How do they do that?
In most other states, coyotes are protected wildlife. There's no season dates or limits.
But they're still protected.
Right. In Utah,
Okay.
we don't even regulate coyotes. So we don't have any authority.
That was my assumption. But, okay,
Right.
Thanks.
Darren, one other thing we'll have to consider is, do we have a fee established for a non-resident trapping license? I don't know.
believe so, yeah.
If we do, then we could do that
Right.
on short order. If we don't, then there's a process to get that established through the legislature, but it would have to get started. That process could be started. So
Yeah,
that's another thing.
Right
we'd
now,
have
if
to
a
look into.
non-resident wants to come trap bobcats, they're required to have a non-resident so it'd be the same permit.
Same permit.
What this would do is require that anybody that wants to come trap in Utah has to have that license. They can't say, I'm only trapping coyotes. I don't
Okay.
need a license.
I'm with you now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Comments from the RAC. Go ahead, Chuck.
We just wanted to say we appreciate the closure on the beaver and those two streams. We've got projects where we're trying to rehabilitate areas that have been burned, and once the aspen and willow come in, it's just really super helpful to have the beaver come in and reestablish the meadows and make the habitat a lot better. So we appreciate you helping us with that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead.
More of a question, I guess. how big of a problem is it? I can see the problem, somebody setting traps for coyotes, catching something else. How big of a problem is that? Anybody got any idea?
You know what, let's have,
Well-
Kelly, this is a little out of normal, but let's have you come up and address that in the mic as you may.
Can I give a quick comment? I know they catch my dogs all the time.
You know, I don't think it's really a major problem right now. I really do think there is a few people that kind of sneak across the border a little bit, trapping coyotes, and might take a bobcat or two home with them. But, you know, like I say, I don't think it's a major problem in Utah, but why not duplicate what our surrounding states are doing?
The only thing I'd add to that, Craig, is that when I talk with the Trappers Association about this, one of the concerns is that the other states are requiring them to do it, but we don't require other states' residents to do it. And it's kind of a fairness thing. If they want to go trap in another state, they feel like it's unfair that guys coming here don't need a license, and they do. So that's another part.
And I understand that because the coyotes are under the Department of Ag, and everything else is under the and I don't know how you resolve that problem, I guess. I agree,
Well,
they ought to need to get a license to trap in Utah, but how do you differentiate between coyotes and bobcats is probably the biggest problem you have.
it is. But anybody that's done very much trapping knows that you set traps out for coyotes, you're going to catch other things too. You're going to catch bobcats occasionally. You're going to catch kit foxes, gray foxes, and why even take that chance? Why not just require them to do, same as the other states? And we talked a little bit about a reciprocating program, which is used a lot back east, but we don't want to eliminate somebody's opportunity. We just want them to, to do the same as we'd have to do if we go to the neighboring state to trap there. One other thing that I forgot to mention earlier too, and I'm not sure if non-residents can get the bounty on a coyote or if that's limited to just residents. It is now? Okay, then that's a moot point then. Thank you.
Okay, other comments from the RAC? If not, we'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, we approve the presentation, the Furbearers as presented. I guess that won't be part of the motion. I'd just like to see you looked into the bounty or the license thing.
Second.
Okay, so the motion is to accept as presented, but ask them to look into the bounty
Yeah.
things. I can say that at the board meeting. That'll work. Thanks. Any discussion? All right, let's go ahead and vote. Gene?
Yes.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Austin?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Bart, I'm glad to see you vote yes, even though we're trapping your dogs.
I know, that has no bearing really on this. I just had to throw it in there.
I always wonder when I'm going to walk up on my dog stuck in a trap. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure sooner or later. All
Can I
right.
tell you a story about that? I had a two-legged dog.
Your last story, you talked about killing endangered animals. I'm a little nervous about your
This was
stories.
we had a two-legged dog, I swear. He could still jump in the back of the pickup.
I will admit that I'm really glad they have
I took
this.
my dog out of 2 different trap sets in one day.
And I'm glad the traps aren't teethed or whatever they call them anymore.
Yeah,
Because that would have, been really bad.
they're pretty gentle on them nowadays. So. All right, Darren.
This last thing was informational on Cougars. We set those numbers a couple years ago. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them. But if not, then
we're good to go. Assuming we watch the presentation, what questions do we have?
I just reiterate what we talked about on the bears, multiplier. We need to just look into that.
Go ahead, Gene. You look like you're trigger happy over there.
Well, the same as I asked about the bears, big, only it was more so with the cougars. We've got to get those damn cougars out of here. They're going to kill what there's left from the drought.
Yeah,
And,
so
we seem to have recovered, the deer seem to have recovered pretty good, and the cougar take was down. Is that correct?
yeah, it was. We saw a similar drop the last time we peaked in the number of cougars we took, and the jury's still out on what that means. We'll see what happens this next year, but most units in the state are year-round unlimited quota on cougars, and so maybe we need to focus effort. I don't know. We'll be having those discussions this summer as we talk about our predator management strategy. BYU and all of our big game data is really learning a lot about the impact of predators especially on adult does, and they're starting to come up with some pretty good metrics about what's the tipping point. When you see cougars killing a certain percentage of your adult does, that's when you're likely to see some top-down or population level effects that are either suppressing the population or causing it to decline. And so I think we definitely are making decisions based on our concerns, but I think coming in the future we'll have even better idea of where it's working, where it's not, where we need to focus attention, those kinds of things. So thanks, Gene.
Can cougar kills be beneficial if you have a disease in the herd or something?
Well, most predator concerns come down to where is your population compared to what the natural carrying capacity of the range is. And the closer you get to that, the less effect predators would have. If they kill a deer or if they don't kill a deer, it's likely to die of something else. So if you're pushed up against habitat, in fact, if you're over, and they could start damaging habitat and lower that. And so that's one of the things we look at. Where are we with regards to our management objectives? But the further you get below the carrying capacity, the more likely a predator is to suppress that population. They just can't grow because, especially if you see, like in the drought, where we've seen these big declines in mule deer numbers and we've maintained high predator levels, those predators don't just leave because there's less deer. They continue the same number of deer, and eventually that'll level out. They'll catch up to each other, but it can take a while. And so our strategy is let's get those densities down as quick as possible, let the deer herd come back, and then just keep an eye on the predation.
Just want to excuse Austin. He just let me know that he's going to have to leave the meeting. He's got some travel arrangements he's got to hit, so we'll excuse Austin. Any other questions? Go ahead, Vernon.
So if these trappers happen to catch a cougar in the trap, do they all need to have a spot and stalk in their pocket so they can harvest it, or what?
Well, right now, except under certain circumstances, it's illegal to take a cougar with a trap, so they can't take it.
We're going to
So
put a
will you come
beep
and let it
button
out
on
for
your
me?
guys'
Yeah, I know,
mic down there on the end of the table.
Let it loose.
We do that. I don't know how often it happens down here, but I personally, if you're lucky, well, I won't go there. If you're lucky, they slip the trap as you're walking up because they get stressed out. You don't have to deal with them. But yeah, we've got the drugs. So we can put them to sleep and let them out.
Can I supply the drug?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Other questions? This is an informational item, but if there's any questions from the public or comments from the public, you're welcome. Any questions? Comments? Okay, additional comments from the RAC. All right. Last agenda item is just a schedule. I'll turn it over to Kevin and let him go over the schedule for next year.
Okay, if you look at the back of your agenda there. So we're just continuing to rotate back and forth between Cedar City and Richfield. And with a 6 o'clock start time, we don't have another RAC meeting until April 18th. That seemed to work pretty good this year. Is everybody okay if we just continue that through 2023 to just go back and forth between Cedar City and Richfield? Okay, and everybody okay with the 6 o'clock start time for all the meetings? We've been a little bit later at times. That it was confusing when some were at 6 and some were at 7. So I think the 6 o'clock start time has worked better, a bit less confusing for everybody. So I think that's all I need, Mr. Chairman.
Great. No concerns there, right?
Nope.
Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and dismiss. Thank you.